Hi and welcome to PhotoIQ. I'm your instructor Gus Cantivero and this is the landscape module, and in this unit we're going to be talking about sunsets and how to use your camera's meter to get the best color. Alright, let's get started. Okay, it's hard to have a landscape class and not talk about sunsets, which is probably the most photographed thing there is on the planet. Whenever anybody goes on vacation to someplace tropical or exotic, you can see that their social media feed is just peppered with beautiful sunsets. Now, the one catch though is that sunsets are not actually that easy to photograph. In order to take your images to the next level, you're going to have to understand a few things about what you're looking at, the light, the saturation of the color, and then try to understand what your camera is seeing, because sunsets are not exactly an easy situation for your camera to read. It's seeing a really bright light coming at it, and then it's seeing a underexposed foreground. So it's trying to understand, do you want to expose for the foreground or do you want to expose for that bright ball of light that's in the sky? So if we turn our attention to the slide, you can see that there's three different phases to the sunset. There's golden hour, the actual sunset when the sun starts to drop below the horizon, and then there's blue hour, which is the time after the sunset when the light is still kind of bouncing off of the atmosphere and bringing in a little bit of a blue color to everything. There's still going to be a little bit of a lingering yellow hue, and then it's starting to fade into night. So there's enough light to photograph and get some really pretty images, but it's going to have a little bit of a blue tone in the shadows and a little bit of a gold tone in the highlights as the light is receding below the horizon. Now, golden hour is one of the most popular times for photographers to shoot because it seems like no matter what you photograph, it's just beautiful. There's this yellow and orange and golden hues that are just reflecting off of everything that you see. All the windows are reflecting golden light. So if you position your subject, if you're taking portraits, for example, it's a very popular time to take portraits, you'll be able to get reflected light coming across and creating a golden glow behind, or a golden glow through the leaves. In autumn, the sun is always low on the horizon. So there's not just the fact that you have leaves changing color and things like that. You're going to have a low sun, which means that golden hour, which is a little early in the autumn, it's going to be 4 to 5 or 4:30 to 5:30 depending where you are, and whether or not daylight savings has occurred yet. And of course, speaking for America, the rest of the world doesn't have daylight savings. So the golden hour is that time when everything just glows with a golden hue. Then right at sunset, and you can see on the graphic, when the sun is around 15 to 18 degrees above the horizon, now you're entering into golden hour. And that time between the 18 degrees and the horizon line, you're going to be getting that golden hue. Then you get right to sunset where the sun starts to drop below the horizon, and the light is going to get more and more acute as it is getting obscured by an obstacle, being the horizon, until enough of the sun is dropped below where it's reduced the amount of illumination that's coming, and the sun is going to start to fade in brightness every second that passes. So let's look at the graphic here. The sun, as it gets down to about 18 degrees, is starting to enter that golden hour phase where the light is passing through a lot of the atmosphere. So when the sun is down here, of course, the light is illuminating everything. So the light is going up and it's bouncing off the atmosphere and coming down, and it's going straight at the subject. It's going down at, say, the ocean or the water that's in front of you, ricocheting up. So everywhere you look, there's the golden hue of the setting sun. When the sun gets down to the horizon, the sun is going to start getting blocked. So the amount of light that's coming through is going to be reducing every second that passes until the sun is eventually below the horizon. When the sun drops below the horizon, it is still able to bounce light off the atmosphere into the visible area wherever you are. But because it's below the horizon now, it's getting darker and darker as it gets further and further away. So again, every minute that passes, it's going to be getting darker, but you still have some light to work with. And we're going to have some visual examples coming up here in just a minute. But you can see the sunrise to the sunset. You have the same thing that happens both directions. Before sunrise, you have blue hour, then you have sunrise, and then you have golden hour post sunrise. The difference though is that it's going to be getting brighter and brighter instead of dimmer and dimmer. When it gets to golden hour at sunset, it's getting darker and darker and darker until the sun sets. So it just happens in reverse. So I have a bunch of images in sequence here. There's a bunch of them, so we're not going to linger too long on each one. You've seen this image before in the last lesson, and this one was shot a good hour before the sun has actually set. And you can kind of estimate by the angle of the light hitting the rocks where it is in the sky. And the fact that it's nice and bright around this area here in the image, that kind of indicates that the sun is at this angle. Okay, so that's going to be around that 18 degree above the horizon. If we move on to the next one, you can see that it becomes a little bit more intense. This is shot just a few degrees lower in the sky. Now I contemplated putting the actual times of day on here by going into the image data and finding what time I shot it, but that would kind of be irrelevant because they're shot in different parts of the world, different seasons, different months of the year. So the time of the day won't actually directly correlate to what one image and the next image are speaking to. I'm actually just talking to how many degrees above the horizon this is. I don't have the exact specific number because I didn't get a compass out and measure. That's not something I normally do when I take a photograph. But you can see that this one's a little bit lower. In the previous image, there is foothills, there's mountains to my left. So those are actually going to be blocking the sun as it gets lower. Whereas in this image, it's just the ocean. So as the sun sets, you can actually see it until the point that it drops below the horizon. Now this one is maybe 15 degrees from setting. And the glow and the effect that it's having on the clouds is very, very dramatic. When the sun gets lower and lower, it's able to actually reflect off the bottom of the clouds. When it's above it, it's reflecting off the top of the clouds, giving you a dark bottom, right? So if your light source is here and your object is here, the light is going to bounce off the top of it, leaving the bottom underlit. When the light source gets lower, now it's lighting the side of it, leaving this side unlit. When the light drops below it, now you're lighting the underside of it, leaving the top unlit. So you'll see in a moment when we get to some of the blue hour examples, the bottom of the cloud is actually lit and the top is dark. Get to this one now, the sun is maybe 10 degrees from the horizon. Now there's no clouds in the sky except for just a little one here, but you can see the dramatic effect that's happening when the light ricochets off the water. Now this one, the camera is looking directly at the sun. So the objects that are lit are only backlit, such as this man here and the woman on the beach towel. There's another man here and there's some beach volleyball happening. And the sun is setting behind the trees, so everything is in silhouette and it's underlit in the front. So when you're gonna be photographing that stuff, you have to kind of choose what you're going to prioritize. Is it the color of the sun and the sky and the clouds, or is it going to be the information in the foreground? And if it is the information in the foreground, the sky is going to wash out. It's just going to be white because there's too many stops of difference between the two. There's probably a good 8 stops of light difference between properly exposing the foreground and properly exposing the sun, which is extremely bright. So moving a little bit later into sunset, this is the Hotel Roosevelt in Los Angeles, and you can see that the clouds are getting lit directly from the side. Okay, so they're not, if you look to the right of the image, you can see that the back side of the clouds are not lit at all, only the front edge. You can also see some of the reflection in the glass of other clouds that are this way, indicating that they're being lit, but there's no direct light on the building. The sun has dropped too low to be able to reach the building. it's being obscured by trees or another building in the foreground in front of that, preventing any light from hitting it. So that's an indication as to how low the sun actually is on the horizon. Moving to another one, this one is shot from a really, really high angle. Now this one is probably around the same moment as the Hotel Roosevelt before this one, but I'm at a much higher angle, so I'm able to still see the sun. Okay, and you can see the Empire State Building, which is a really, really tall building. That Hotel Roosevelt only rises to just, I don't know, maybe the height of the ankle of the Empire State Building. So you can see what happens when the sun is all the way at the horizon, starting to drop below, just at the moment of sunset. It's only able to illuminate the tallest objects in the scene. Now moving on to the last moment of sunset, now the sun is actually dropped below the horizon, and there's some high foothills here that are helping that to happen. So it's, you know, we're talking 1 minute difference in each of these photos in sequence. You know, maybe from that first one I showed you, 5 minutes later, and then 5 minutes later, and then 2 minutes later, and then 1 minute later. That's the amount of time that you're talking about. If you want to get just that moment, you need to be there ahead of time so that you can be able to plan your shot and anticipate what's going to happen. And hopefully you get lucky and you're able to capture a really cool cloud formation. So you can see that the front side of the clouds facing the sun are illuminated, whereas the back side facing the camera are dark. And that's how dense clouds actually are. They don't allow light to pass all the way through. That's why it's so dark when you have an overcast day versus when the clouds break and they open up and you have a clear sky. It becomes 4 and 5 times brighter than it was when it was cloudy. Now, if we move to even another moment later, this is probably about the same time as the one before this. If we're able to compare the actual kind of illumination of the horizon line, and once again, I want to notice how dark the foreground is, right? If you want to choose between the two, you have to make a choice. You can try to make it in the middle somewhere and then hope to adjust it in post-processing, but you're not going to be able to maintain equal exposure across the frame. Moving it back to this one, again, this is in San Diego, so there's not much of a foreground to block the sun. There is a jetty out here, there's a little island that is blocking the sun, but it is dropped below the horizon. You can basically tell because of the relative brightness surrounding the area where the sun is. So maintaining exposure for the sky here will allow you to get that deep saturation of the dark blue of the night sky coming in, and then the last few minutes, or last few seconds really, of the sun at the horizon. And this is a fun way to photograph too, because if you're able to capture people in the foreground watching the sunset and enjoying the night, it creates a scene where you can really appreciate what's going on. Now we're going to pass into blue hour because the sun is dropped below the horizon. And the 3 photos I'm showing you here, the one before this one and the next one, were all actually shot in sequence within about 10 minutes. So it gives you a really good example of the progress from sunset into blue hour. So in this one we have a house on stilts sitting out above the water, and you can see that the exposure of the sky is the same as a very low-powered indoor incandescent light bulb, because you can see this one light that's on in that room, which I think is actually kind of a cool feature of this image. It shows how, you know, the lights are coming on. It's the transition from day into night when you can't see from the available light anymore. The sun has disappeared. There's still a little bit of a yellow glow at the horizon, transitioning very quickly into a dark blue night sky. Moving to the next one. Now, look, you can actually see there's a star in the sky exposed here. That's how dark that's gotten. So there's a star that's exposed. There's still a little bit of a glow, but just a few minutes later than this, and it's going to be gone entirely. I don't have any more photos from beyond this, but you can see that there's still some very cool things that are going on. You have reflection in the water. There is a aircraft carrier from the naval base that's docked here in the San Diego harbor. There's still a little yellow glow, but you're able to read the the street lights that have now come on in the parking lot. There's artificial lights that are here that are actually now brighter than the sky itself. And that's kind of an indication as to how dark it actually is. When you get to that time, you're going to be opening up or slowing your shutter speed or opening your aperture or increasing your ISO. One of those tools, you're going to have to be increasing them on a moment-to-moment basis in order to maintain your exposure, because the images are going to be getting progressively darker and darker. Okay, enough of pretty pictures of sunsets. Now we need to talk a little bit of technical details in order to make sure that you have the tools necessary to capture this. In case you haven't guessed, this week's assignment is going to be capturing sunsets. So the meter on your camera is going to be telling you an approximate exposure of what you need to set the camera to in order to get a proper photo. You need to understand what the camera is thinking it's looking at, or what it's trying to interpret when it tells you what that number is. So if you look at the screen here, I have what the meter says is a properly exposed image of the wall in my office. Now, the reason I chose that is because it's just basically a neutral gray tone that the camera will easily be able to reference. Now, it's not a complicated scene. I'm not trying to trick it. I'm just trying to explain to you what the camera wants to do with the image to feel like it's properly exposed. Now, what it's gonna do, over here on the left-hand side, highlighted in the gold box, that's the camera's meter. It's gonna be in different locations on your screen, but it's always gonna look something like this. At 0, that is basically what it says is a neutral, properly exposed image. And what it's doing is it's taking whatever the light value of the object that you're pointed at, it's going to take it and then bring it down to a middle gray. So just a middle tone. So if it's a candle and you point the camera right at that, you're gonna keep on reducing your exposure in order to get that candle down to what is basically a middle gray tone. Now, of course, it's supposed to be bright. A light is supposed to be bright. So it really shouldn't be at 0, but the camera doesn't know that. So you're going to have to learn how to read the meter in order to properly adjust and expose your images. So if I go down 2 stops, right? So you can see my settings here on the screen. It's 1/25th of a second, f2.5 at 400 ISO. Now, if I go down 2 stops to 500th of a second, you can see what it does to the image. That's 2 stops underexposed. So it's actually a big difference. If I go 2 stops overexposed, according to the meter, it gives you a pretty bright white wall. That's not exactly the actual color of the wall, but neither is that. So it's actually kind of in between. The actual color of the wall is maybe 1 stop brighter than this, because it is a light gray. It's not a middle gray, it's a light gray. And it's not white either. And 2 stops overexposed makes it basically white. So you need to kind of read the scene. Now, if you have a mirrorless camera, you have an electronic viewfinder, it's going to be giving you a preview of the image as you adjust your exposure. And that's a great way to see what the effect is before you take the photograph. So you can spin your shutter speed dial, or you can rotate your ISO, and you can get a preview of your image, and then you can decide what you want it to look like before you take the picture. Now, of course, if you are already shooting RAW, and I hope that you are, you have several stops of latitude to be able to correct the image. So you can shoot it right at 0, and then you can open up 1 full stop, no problem, and the image will look great. Now, the next tool that you probably have on your camera, especially if you have a mirrorless, is the histogram. You might need to go and turn it on though. It probably isn't on by default, but it might be. I don't know exactly which camera you're using. So you might have to go into your menu, and there's some different viewing aids you can turn on and off, and histogram is probably one of those tools. And the histogram is present on the screen here in this orange box. So remember, this is the meter and this is the histogram. Now, when we're at 0, we're at a middle gray, so you can see the histogram is positioned right in the middle. Now, the histogram tells you the distribution of the tones, the values, the light quality. So basically this whole scene consists of this much tonal range of just gray. So everything is compressed right to there. There's no highlights and there's no shadows. It's just a flat image. Now, if we underexpose by 2 stops, you can see that the histogram moves to the left. And you can see on the bright image, though 2 stops overexposed, that the histogram moves to the right. So you can probably figure out by now that the left is dark and to the right is light. Now, of course, this is opposite on your screen, so whatever, that way. That way is dark, that way is light. So when you are adjusting and you're overexposing, you'll see that the histogram, I'll reverse it for this way, it's gonna move to that side of the screen for you. When you go and you darken the image, the histogram is gonna move on to the other side. So here's a little more specific look at the histogram. And I have an enlarged one taken out of Capture One. This is what the histogram looks like in Capture One. And on the left side is black and on the right side is white. And up and down tells you how much of that tone is present. Now, in this scene, in this histogram, there is a large spike of shadow tone. And then most of the image is contained within the midtones and a little bit of the highlight here. But the majority of it, there's a big spike of shadow. So see how it goes all the way to the top? It means that there's a lot of that present. Now, this is actually kind of an arbitrary height. Hypothetically, the histogram can infinitely go up. So this is just sort of a snapshot. However, it can only go to 0 in black, and the number for white is 255. So 255. So it's 0 to 255. That is the total number of shades that it can go from dark to light. So you can have 0, that's black, black, black. There's no data contained within that. It's just pure black. And then 255 would be pure white. And if you notice on this histogram, it doesn't make it all the way to 255 white, which means that when I exposed it, I allowed there to be some heavy shadows, but I preserved the highlights. Now the histogram is more useful and specific than the meter. The meter is a very quick reference, which I use all the time just to tell me, am I under or overexposed before I even look at the scene. But the histogram is going to give me a much more specific understanding of what my image looks like and what the exposure looks like. When you shoot a scene with your meter, the meter can only tell you the overall exposure of the image. It's not gonna know, like take for example, the lights behind me. If this was in heavy shadow and these lights were still present, it's gonna say, keep opening up the exposure because I can't see in the shadows. But you're gonna be blowing out and losing the tone of these lights over here. So you have to look at your histogram, and the histogram would tell you, you have a spike of a highlight and you're about to lose it. So if we move to the next one, you can see which image that histogram actually is from. So I loaded this image into Capture One, and then I took a screenshot of the histogram. And you can see there's that spike of a shadow, and there's only a little bit of that highlight. And that's because the highlight is actually off the screen. The sun is not present, so there is no perfect white. I was able to maintain the tone in this area. So this spike over here in the upper midtones and highlights, that is this area. And then all of this shadow is this whole foreground. All this area of the ground, the landmass, that is all the shadow data. And then this whole midtone area, that's all the dark clouds and the blue sky. So hopefully this will give you a good illustration of what the histogram really means. So if I were listening to the meter, because it was saying, no, the ground is underexposed and you're ruining it, it would say, open up a stop or two. And I would do that, then that sun right there would get pushed into 255 and beyond and then be clipped. So when we lose data, when it's beyond the visible spectrum, it's been clipped, okay? So if your shadows drop to 0, that's clipped. And if your highlights go to 255, that's called clipped as well. So you want to keep it within that visible range. Now with a sunset, you're gonna have to choose one or the other. So I had to choose to lose some of the shadow data in here because I can't keep both. Now I could probably post-process it and lift this shadow detail. I find this to be much more dramatic. That's my taste. It's up to you to create your images, so don't worry about that. I'm just giving you an example of what I think is a good image. So here I have a capture off of the back of my camera while I was looking at a very challenging scene. Now, this is gonna be similar to shooting a sunset, and I want you to understand the way the meter works in a little bit more specific detail. So if I drag the slider, now I'm looking out a bright window, and right now there's exposure inside the window frame, and I can see the wall and all that stuff. Now if I go forward, you'll see as I go from f2 to f2.5, 28, 32, 36, it's getting darker inside, and the outside is starting to come into exposure. Now you can see the meter is at 2 stops overexposed right here. Now the one detail that you don't know, or the camera doesn't know, is that it was actually overcast. Now watch what the camera thinks is 0. I'll go forward, and there, F14, and it's given me basically a blue sky. So it's sort of a middle gray tone. You can also see the tree here has become kind of muddy. It's gotten very dark and underexposed. So it's not actually a proper exposure. Now, if you look at the histogram over here, you can see that there's no white. However, the sky was white. It was overcast. So if I back up and I go to, say, like a stop and a third, right there, you can see that now the histogram has more data in there. There's a wider tonal range because there's white sky, and then you have leaf detail. So the exposure in the leaf has actually kind of separated, and now you can see into that shadow. Now backing up again, just to show you a little faster, dark inside, way overexposed, it's not even on the meter. All right, now we're looking at 3 stops, 2 1/3, it's coming down, coming down. Now that's actually where it looked like, you know, for real with the white sky and the exposure in the tree. Keep going all the way down to 0, and you can see that the tree is now very dark and the sky itself is down to a middle tone. Okay, now I want to jump into capture 1 because I want to show you an image where I exposed what the camera roughly said it should be, and then how I can post-process the image to make it a little bit more artistically interesting. Okay, so let's jump into capture 1 here, and if I go to my exposure tools, you can see right here there's the exposure slider. So if I drop down 1 stop, you can see what it does to the sky. That it's actually brought in color and tone into the clouds and into that golden tone. So let's try to go a little further and see what happens. Okay, so if we drop down to almost 3 stops, now it's starting to look a little unrealistic. That's actually kind of beyond what the camera's capable of exposing for. Let's go back to, say, right around 2 stops. That's actually not bad, but you can see that the foreground is completely gone. So if we use some of our recovery tools like shadow, now the sky, the foreground starts to come back. We've lost a little drama in the sky, but that's okay. It actually looks pretty good. So that is one really quick way to use the shadow recovery slider and drop the overall exposure of the sky. That'll bring it back to something that's much more like what you saw to your naked eye. See the tool right here? This is the histogram, right? On the left is the shadow, and on the right is the highlight. So the way that this works is you can drop the highlight, and that's gonna take whatever white is and reduce it. So you can see the numbers down here. You have input, output. So you're gonna drop this, and the output is dropping from 240 to 20 to 100. So basically, instead of white being at 255, white is now at 200. So it's dropped it from white to basically, like, you know, 18% gray or 15% gray, somewhere around there. So if we can bring it back up, Now, the other way you can do it is you can slide along this axis, and it is taking something lower and making it white. So as when you drop it, you're taking white and making it darker. When you go left, you're actually saying, this is what I want white to be. So those 60% whites are now 100%. So when you slide this along, this is normal white, and now we're basically saying anything right here is now white, and anything beyond it is just gone. So you can see this histogram up here. Watch what happens to it as I move that. See how it clips on the right-hand side as I drag this to the left? It's saying white is now lower and lower threshold. Or I could do this, and now it's getting really confused. Look what happens to the image. It's really weird. It's like polarizing. So it's almost like inverting colors and stuff. It gets pretty crazy. So we'll put that back. And then what else you can do with the blacks, you can drag this over, and it does the same thing in reverse. It's saying anything below this number is now black. Or you can go up and it's lifting the blacks. Anything below this number is now lifted up to this minimum, basically. So you can bring it to there, and then you can grab different points in here, and you can just reduce them a little bit, or you can increase them just a little bit. And then you can get these and decrease them just a little, or you can increase them just a little bit. So this is a tone curve, and this is how that works. You can increase contrast, or you can reduce contrast. See how that works? So this is a typical, what we call an S curve, because it goes like this, right? Goes like it's an S curve. And anything here is being lifted up a little brighter, and anything here is getting darkened just a little bit. So we're increasing contrast with this method. So as I said, the meter will have a hard time with sunsets. So you're gonna have to meter for the highlight of the scene. So take your camera, point it at the sky, get whatever the meter is on that, the reading, adjust your exposure to bring it down to say 1 stop over, recompose, and then take your image and see what happens. Now next, moving to blue hour, auto mode may want to expose for the foreground, once again blowing out the sky. Now even though the blue hour sky is going to be getting darker and darker by the moment, the meter's still not really going to be giving you what you want out of it. You're still going to want a dramatic, contrasty scene. Now that's only if you're pointing at the sky. If you're shooting something entirely different and you're looking the other direction, the sky is going to be illuminating whatever you're looking at. So then you can trust your meter. When you're in a backlit situation, as you can see here, the lifeguard booth and the sky here, it's backlit. It's lit from the back side of where you're standing. Okay, we've come to the assignment, and your assignment this week is to shoot a bracket of 3 images of a sunset. Now a bracket is to underexpose, properly expose, and overexpose. We're going to be taking those for safety so that we can see exactly how our camera works. Doing tests like this and shooting like this is going to give you a really good handle on how your camera perceives a scene. Once you have enough experience with it, you'll just know intuitively to over or underexpose, or point this way and then recompose so that you can get an idea of what the exposure should be. Just because the back of your screen says that's what the image looks like, that is not the best way to judge your exposure. When you get home and you put it on the computer, then you're really going to understand what's been exposed properly or not. I've been fooled many times by looking at the back of my camera and realizing maybe the focus was not correct or the exposure was wrong in some way or another. Sometimes the screens on your camera are actually a little bit more flattering than the image on the computer, and that's because the camera companies want their images to look great and they want you to be happy with them, but that can be a little bit misleading sometimes. You need to get home, put them on the computer, properly adjust them, and then you'll know whether the image was done correctly or not. So shoot one image that is +2 exposure value, EV, shoot one image that is 0 EV, and shoot one that is -2 EV. Examine the exposure differences and see which is the best. I hope to see you in the next lesson. Until then, keep shooting.